Chapter 11 of Woodcraft Boys at Sunset Island. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elaine Conway, England. Woodcraft Boys at Sunset Island by May Folwell Hoisington and Lillian Elizabeth Roy. Chapter 11 Witter Tonkan Left in Charge. At breakfast Sunday morning, Mrs. Remington announced a startling piece of news. Friends, children, and Sagamore in the making. I have to surprise you. Aunt Edith and I are going to Boston on a visit. While I'm away, you girls are to stay with Aunt Flo at Rosemary. Anna and Teddy are going to Isola Bella, and you boys are to remain with Fred in charge of the island. How do you like the plan? A mixed chorus arose. Oh, don't go! And fine, we'll be good. And how long will you stay? Mrs. Remington laughed, but waited to hear from Fred. He rose, and keeping an eagle eye on his future vassals, proclaimed, "Order will be kept, or I, Witter Tonkan, will perish in the attempt. Woof! A black bear has spoken." "When you're in charge, you can really earn your title of Island Chief, Fred," remarked Elizabeth. "When are we going to Mrs. Charlton's?" asked Trixie. "I suppose you girls can wait and see me off. You can pack your suitcases for a week or 10 days, and the captain can set you ashore at the Rosemary landing, after leaving me at the steamer wharf. We are going by the Boston boat, you know. It is much cooler." What a bustle there was during the 2 days that ensued. On Monday, Aunt Flo and Mrs. Charlton came in the Orient to visit the islanders. "I thought it best to come over and take an inventory of my ready-made family," laughed Aunt Flo. "Oh, we'll be good as saints if you'll only take us on enough motor trips to last a month," exclaimed Elizabeth. "Maybe the boys would like to sail over for a day's trip too," suggested Aunt Edith. But the boys had disappeared from the porch. Fred had given them the high sign for a pow-wow to be held in his teepee immediately. That evening the girls begged to be told what was the cause of the serious and animated pow-wow. Portentous looks were all the answer returned, while Mrs. Remington remained in the room. "Say, who wants to walk to the south end of the island and watch the tide come in the moonlight?" asked Fred, when it was found that his mother expected to remain in the room. Everyone declared they wanted to see such a sight, and soon the room was vacated and quiet, Mrs. Remington being occupied with her written orders for Mose during her absence. Once down upon the little beach, Fred announced that he and the others planned to do lots of things that his mother wanted done, such as blasting out a big rock in the middle of Treasure Cove, raising a big new flagpole, and making a pebble walk along the little log cabin which was Mrs. Remington's sanctuary when she was driven to retirement from the madding crowd. "She will love that!" exclaimed Elizabeth. "Oh, we intend doing lots of other things too," bragged Billy. "We're going to cook our own meals over a camp fire," declared Dudley. "That's to save Mose the work while you girls are away," added Paul. "Listen to him! Why, you boys eat twice as much as all of the islanders together," scorned Edith. "Besides, I don't believe you younger boys can cook a thing," came from Elizabeth doubtfully. "I wouldn't want to eat the stuff you cook," said Trixie. "Fred and Bill know a lot about camp cooking, and they are going to show Paul and me," admitted Dudley. The idea of having the boys do something to surprise and please Mrs. Remington upon her return made Trixie and her girls wish to do something for Mrs. Charlton. So a conference was held in Elizabeth's room, to which Anna was invited. "What do you suppose Aunt Edith would like most?" asked Elizabeth, after all were seated. "I know!" cried practical little Edith. "What?" "Have flower beds weeded, and all that wild grass dug out of the paths." "Oh!" was the disappointed reception of the commonplace proposition. "I can wear old gloves, you know," ventured Trixie. Her hearers laughed as Trixie's nails showed the result of the earnest efforts of a city polish, of which she was quite proud. "Well, "We may consider Edith's plan as a side work," urged Elizabeth, when no other inspiration seemed on tap. Mrs. Remington was not permitted to forget her promise to take everybody on the Medric for a last farewell to her at the camp grounds where the Boston boat stopped for passengers. Whether it was the farewell, the sail, or the fun on the mainland that was the inducement, she wisely refrained from questioning. "What if it rains?" wondered Edith. "Oh, we can wear clothes that won't be damaged by a drop of rain," said Elizabeth. "Trixie can wear her checked skirt if it's rain you want," plagued Billy. "Now then, I'll wear it just for spite," retorted Trixie. "I'll prove to you by the sunshine that the checks are not a rain jinx." Tuesday dawned clear and sunny, therefore proving Trixie's statement to be true. The merry party set out directly after lunch, as Mrs. Remington remarked that the Boston boat was very early at odd times, especially so if one happened to be a little late. A Medric's engine helped her buck the tide, while Bill remarked, "We sure have got a favourable puff." It was almost low water when they reached the wharf, and the Medric had to be anchored off the landing, while her passengers were set ashore in the tender. The moment feet were on terra firma, the owners started for the post office and general store where candy and cake were sold. But on the way a tintyper's caravan was found resting by the side of the main road from the wharf, and the diversion was invaded and well patronised that day. The meagre delights of the camp ground were soon exhausted, and time hung heavily upon the hands of the active islanders. Then Mrs. Remington announced that the Boston steamer would be an hour late that day. "Oh, why did we leave our happy home?" wailed Billy. "Think of all the fun we are missing," added Paul. "There are certain joys in a lingering farewell, but I say that some of them are drawn out much too long," remarked Fred. "How?" laughed the other boys, and Mrs. Remington joined even at the expense of her own feelings. "The question still remains before us, what to do with this extra hour the gods bestowed," mourned Elizabeth, who had had visions of rosemary in the sunset glow. "I'll run over and ask that jitney man who is watching us as if we were outlaws," said Fred, starting off across the road. The man was very communicative, for he had nothing else to do at the time. "Thar's a merry-go-round back over that hill. It was running all mornin', and I guess it's thar still." "Just the thing," replied Fred, thanking him. The suggestion met with instant acceptance, and everyone started for the hill designated, but a disappointment awaited them. The merry-go-round was deserted, with the sole exception of a small tow-headed boy. However, Fred was equal to the emergency. "Come on, come all! These steeds shall run around the track till set of sun!" shouted he, beckoning wildly. But Mrs. Remington would not allow him to tamper with the engine or carousel, so she questioned the small boy, who turned out to be the proprietor's son. "Now you run and find your daddy and tell him we want $2 worth of rides," promised Mrs. Remington. At the munificent offer the barefooted urchin showed a swift and dusty pair of heels to the would-be riders, and soon returned with both father and grandfather, the latter being the patriarch of the money-till. "Isn't this fun? I've always wanted to ride on a merry-go-round," cried Trixie. "Maybe you won't think it fun after a ride," said Paul. "You just watch me and see," boasted Trixie, smiling. "I'm going to climb on the animals while we're waiting for the man to start up the engine," proposed Billy. "Me for the lion!" shouted Dudley, as he mounted the king of beasts. "Paul, let's ride the white horses side by side and pretend we're running a race," suggested Trixie. "Betcha a cookie I'll beat," laughed Paul. "You wouldn't beat me if these were real horses. I can ride anything, even a colt," teased Trixie. "Oh, well, that colt of the captain's was green and full of fire. The captain says so," said Paul, defendingly. The carousel began to turn slowly by this time, and with many a wheeze and groan it gathered momentum. Everyone laughed at its slowness at first, but the urging on of their steeds must have infected the merry-go-round, for it soon whirled at a surprising speed. Mrs. Remington sat near the old white-bearded ticket-chopper, watching the different expressions on the children's faces as the carousel went round. When the first slow circle was made, Trixie had laughed merrily and cried, "Oh, this is a real joy ride!" When it went somewhat faster, she remained silent, and as she spun around on the horse, passing Mrs. Remington at rapid intervals, her face looked grey and her eyes seemed fixed. "Oh, we surely are going too fast!" gasped she finally. "Oh, no, we'll go faster than this. Just hold on!" cheered Paul. "Oh, I'm sure I'm slipping off. Oh, oh!" wailed Trixie. "You're all right. Just stick on," laughed Paul. "Oh, Paul, I'm getting so dizzy. I'll fall." "I'll steady you. Here, grab hold of the horse with your knees and hang on to the iron pole in front," advised Paul. "There goes my hat and oh, the old thing has shaken out all my side combs," came from Trixie, weakly. "Never mind that. Just hold on." "I can't hold another minute." "Keep a stiff upper lip now, Trix. We're slowing down," encouraged Paul, throwing an arm about the girl as she swayed uncertainly. And indeed the awful swirl did slacken, and in a few more moments, with one last yawp, the hurdy-gurdy gave up the spirit of music. Then a very pale and shaky Trixie was lifted from the racehorse and helped over to a seat beside Mrs. Remington. "Oh, wasn't it awful!" gasped she, shuddering. "Awful? Why, it was great!" cried Dudley. "I should say so. Look, I got the brass ring, Trixie." "Want it for another try?" asked Billy generously, but Trixie thought discretion to be the better part of valour. She knew from actual experience what a merry-go-round meant, so she sat contentedly by and watched the others whirl. When even Billy had been sated with the dervish delight, Mrs. Remington led her escorts back to the wharf, where they found Aunt Edith and Aunt Flo Flo had arrived from Rosemary by land. When it was suggested that the girls start back with Aunt Flo Flo at once, there was a chorus of protests. "We're going to stay as long as anybody and say good bye," retorted Elizabeth, fearing she would miss some fun. The two chiefly concerned in saying farewells thought this persistence worthy of a greater if not a better object, but they consented to the delay of the return party, and in its own good time the city of Rockland bore down upon the landing. Then the young folks had the gratification of positively knowing, by evidence of their own sight, that their guardians were well out of the way for a time. "Oh, gee! We won't do a thing while we're boss," sighed Billy, with a great sense of the time before him. "Some fun, I should say!" ejaculated Paul, while Dudley whistled a medley of many tunes, and fox-trots and tangos. "But the Island Chief rules, remember," threatened Fred. While on the way to Rosemary, the Islanders discussed the fact that fine weather broke the hoodoo of Trixie's rangings, but it hoodooed her in another way. "My, but she was green on that carousel!" laughed Billy. "I never thought Trix could look so sick," added Dudley. "I wasn't sick a bit. I was only dizzy. Only my head," defended Trixie valiantly. The boys laughed teasingly, and Elizabeth looked off at the horizon while groping for her poetic medium. Finally she turned to Trixie. "It's a shame to wreck a perfectly good poem, for I love Tennyson dearly, but the aptness tempts me beyond measures, so here goes: "The jinx that pursued Trixie, with apologies to Tennyson. Like souls that balance joy and pain, with smiles and cries for help again, fair maiden Trixie flies with rain upon her good steed's wooden mane. The tin pan music full of cheer, her friends' loud laughter came between, and far in ticket box unseen, the grey beard gathered in the green from Witatonkan there. At times the organ piped its song, what time 'twas loud, how seemed it long? Sometimes her courser wheeled along, hushed all her cries of bitter wrong, by laughing friends with fuller sound, in curves the wooden racers ran, her drooping head to bob began, upon the merry go round, as in the boyhood of the year, Sir Lancelot and Queen Guinevere rode thro' the converts, Paulo dear, and Trixie galloped she in fear. She seemed to part from her steed's spring, a gown of faded jet she wore, buckled with silver clasps before, her light straw hat embroidered o'er with woollen bird a wing. Now this way leaned she, now she let her fear the better of her get, and more unsteadier yet, her nervous grasp Paul's shoulder met, and fiercer now she grasped the mane, than she whose elfin courser springs by night to eerie warblings, while all the while that music rings and dins into her brain. As she fled fast thro' sun and shade, the happy winds upon her played, losing the ringlets from the braid. She looked so helpless as she swayed, a hat one side a tip. Pauly had all that he could do to keep himself from falling too. He needed all the strength he knew to save her should she slip. The classic thus converted by Elizabeth was hailed with loud acclaim by the boys, but Trixie said never a word. How the poetess made her separate piece was never told, but Trixie was as friendly as ever the next time the two appeared together. Wednesday morning at the earliest permissible tide, the captain and the boys were busy drilling into the ledge of Treasure Cove. The boys were deeply interested when they realised that before another tide flowed over that ledge a blast could be set off. In the meantime they went fishing, and soon had a fine mess of cunners for their camp lunch. Knowing the extent of the boys' appetites, Mose's tender heart ached in dread of empty stomachs and a raid on his pantry when he was not at hand to defend the fort. So he brought a large pan full of biscuits and fixins on the side to the cooks, the fixins comprising a hearty meal by themselves. "Oh, Mose, you needn't have taken this trouble. We're just going to live a simple life while mother's away," said Billy. "Yes, you see, Mose, we're now serving our toasted bread and baked potatoes. Sit down and have some with us," urged Paul. Mose eyed the charred bread and half-cooked potatoes and winked at the captain. "I don't believe I will partake of dis muniference today, but tank yo' all de same." The captain felt very grateful to Mose for his additions to the menu, so he added, "Oh, do sit down and be friendly, Mose." "Yes, Mose, I'm just cooking the cunners. They're fine," added Fred. "Well, seein' as I fetched a bit from my own domain, I don't mind ef I tas some cunners," sighed Mose, who was fond of this fish. As Fred served him a delicious slab of the broiled fish, Mose remarked, "Does tas kinder good to eat some udder chef's cookin'. No tanks, Billy, I don't guess I'll have any pertates." The boys took each other a potato and did their best to enjoy them, but it was not to be. The potatoes were more than half raw. "Lemme tell you all," said Mose, after the potatoes had been replaced on the fire, "taters take a heap o' cookin', 'specially when dey's big an' not cut up." "Bring them here, boys, and I'll show you what to do with them," offered Fred, taking the frying pan and dropping a chunk of butter in it. Then the boys watched and soon learned how to fry and cook potatoes, an art many cooks lack. "Now for the blast!" cried the captain, when the dishes and pans had been cleaned with sand and water. "You boys watch Captain and me fix the fuse, and then when we yell you must run way up on the porch of Mother's retreat and stand there," ordered Fred. The three boys were greatly surprised to see Captain Ed cut the dynamite with his knife as if it were a cheese. "It looks just like a roll of yellow plasticine," said Dudley. "It won't act like one," laughed Billy. "You know last year Captain and Fred blasted out the boulders for our council place and we had to cover the rocks with logs. and things to keep them from flying through the air and smashing the windows," explained Billy, for Paul's and Dudley's benefit. "Oh, did you blast for that ring?" wondered Paul. "I should think we did. We have to blast for everything. There isn't a level spot on the whole island. Did you think the pebbles grew so level and smooth on that council place?" laughed Fred. "I thought it had to be filled in where any hollows happened to be, but I didn't know you had to blow off the bumps," said Paul in defence. That made the Captain laugh, and he now turned and said, "Run to cover now, boys. I'm going to light the fuse." So the boys scrambled up the pathway, while Fred and the Captain lit the fuse and then ran to hide behind a big spruce. But Paul, curious to note the effect of that harmless-looking cheese, lingered behind the other boys, thus hoping to get a closer view of the explosion. Just as the terrific blast rumbled, Fred sighted the tardy boy. He dashed out, grabbed him roughly, yanked him back to safety, and then pitched into him. "Don't! You're hurting me, Fred," whimpered Paul, with a better realization of his danger as the rocks began raining down upon the spot where he had just stood. "You ought to be hurt. Good and plenty too, just so you'll never do such a fool thing again. I'm chief of this island, I'll have you to know, and you've got to obey orders." Billy and Dudley ran to see what had caused the quarrel, and the Captain, who had seen the rescue, came over to tell Paul a story as a warning in the future. "You boys know the lighthouse just down of Spruce Island? Well, last year old Captain Ball was blasting out some rocks in the road near his barn. He got careless like at the last and stood too near, right out in the open, and by heck, a chunk of rock as big as my two fists come plumb down on top of his head and killed him then and thar. Not a minute to think what he wanted done 'bout things." After an impressive silence, the Captain added with a certain feeling of satisfaction, "But he had a grand funeral, the finest ever given in these parts. One of them Dark Harbour millionaires lent the widder his big private yacht to carry the remains to Metinicus, where the Captain hailed from. Seeing she hadn't got to pay any cost for shipping, Mrs. Ball put all that money in a casket, and it was so fine that it seemed like a shame to put all them silver handles and satin puffs in the ground. Widder Ball invited everybody to make the trip with the Captain, and most everyone accepted the invitation too. There would have been room on that yacht for a few more, it was that big. Yes, sir, that was one grand funeral, what with red plush curtains and willow armchairs everywhere, and a dining room fixed up with painted dishes and sparkling glass. I sometimes wish how old Captain Ball ought to know about that trip. He would have felt better where he is, I'm sure." The boys had listened to the sudden ending of Captain Ball's career without due respect for dynamite, and Captain Ed, finding Paul had not been thoroughly frightened by his tale, drove it well home. "But you wouldn't have a good time like Captain Ball. You'd be sent home in a box, and no yacht and crowd of folks to sail to your funeral. So just keep behind a tree after this." Paul suddenly realized how lonely he must feel if he was instantly killed by a rock and freighted all the way from Maine to New Jersey, and he felt contrite and humble for a full hour after the incident closed. The rest of the afternoon was given to preparing an old spar for the flagpole. It was about 30 feet in length, so that all the boys worked at the same time in sandpapering and polishing the wood. "Next time I'll go over to the cove, I'll have the blacksmith make a collar to go round the masthead, and then we'll have it all ready for the raising bee before your mother comes back. We want everything done and waiting, so all we have to do when she comes is to hoist the flag," added Billy. The following day Uncle Tom came over and announced that he was ready to start the rifle range and teach the boys how to handle a gun. "Did they say we could?" asked Paul eagerly, his desire to obey in certain ways tinctured by the tale about Captain Ball. "Yes, the committee reported favourably providing that I would keep a watch of you all and never let you get reckless." So the boys painted a large target on a packing case and set it up against a rock where a clear range could be had. Uncle Tom chose a spot where no danger to passing boatmen could be incurred. The spyglass was trained upon the target, and each boy was allowed 5 shots each turn. The use of the glass obviated the many tiresome trips to and from the target to count the score for every boy. Only between the turns did the captain go to the board and put a dab of paint on the marks made by each boy. During these intervals no one was allowed to load or handle a gun. Captain Ed made a splendid score with Fred's Marlin 38-55, but Paul and Dudley took a long time to get to the proper range and sight. Their bullets cut into the ledges right and left, so that the captain laughed heartily. "When we need more blasting done, there's no use wasting money for dynamite. We'll just ask you 2 boys to aim at Treasure Cove, and your fire will blow off the top of the ledges." The others tittered, but were too much engaged to care much whether the captain joshed them or not. Then Fred, who stood at the spyglass, called, "A hit for Paul!" That spurred Dudley to better work, so when it came his turn to try he took great pains to aim carefully, and was rewarded by seeing the splinters fly from the packing case. Evening came all too soon, for the joy of firing real rifles was intoxicating to the boys. They begged Uncle Tom to be sure and come over every day, as early in the morning as he could get away. "Oh, but I'm scheduled to take the girls out on some of these days," he protested. "However, I'll try to get in some regular practicing hours with you boys." The rifle range was almost forgotten the next morning, when Captain Ed brought in the mail. An answer from Mr. Remington to Billy's plea for the launch authorised him to go ahead and get it, if the captain says it is all right. As that necessitated an immediate exodus from the island, an eager pilgrimage started for the little landing near Saturday Cove, where lay the coveted craft at her mooring. To the disinterested eye she seemed old and shabby, to say nothing of dirt. To Billy, however, she was a vision of beauty and a promise of joy. The ex-owner took the lad for a trial spin so that he could learn the tricks of the little engine. Billy disdained the tow offered by Captain Ed and insisted upon returning under his own power. Not for nothing had he watched and helped for weeks with the captain's engines, hoping for the day when he should be captain of his own launch. That same night, as they lounged about Fred's tepee, the chief made a suggestion. "Now that Cap'n Bill has a launch, suppose we make an aquaplane? We might start it tomorrow." The idea was met with delighted "hows," and in the morning all started on the carpenter's job. The plane completed, the boys felt such a pride in the work that they longed for someone to admire it. Besides, they had to have an audience when they aquaplaned. So it came about that all the girls and Aunt Flo were invited to a bathing party with aquaplaning on the side. The boys drank greedily of the admiration freely poured out by the girls as they stood about the plane. Finally the girls were invited to try it. "Isn't it awfully hard to manage?" asked Trixie. "Not much harder than that wooden horse on the merry-go-round," teased Paul. "Even if you should fall off you can swim, you know," added Billy. "I'll let Elizabeth try it first," generously allowed Trixie. Elizabeth was a splendid swimmer, and nothing on or in water could daunt her, so Billy was soon towing her along after his launch. "Gee, that's pretty good, Lizzie, for a girl, I mean," conceded Billy, as he admired the way she stood upright and managed the plane. "You needn't have added that last 'for a girl.' Just remember, please, that I learned to swim at a much younger age than you ever did," retorted Elizabeth, ruffled at the hated nickname. Then, when everyone had tried the aquaplane, Aunt Flo had something to say. "Won't you boys come over to Rosemary and hold a council for some friends of mine? What with rifle shooting, aquaplaning, and other intense delights, the boys were not as enthusiastic as usual. We're going to have piles of ice cream and delicious cakes, to say nothing of other good things," hinted Elizabeth, her superior knowledge of boys standing her in good stead. "Well, seeing that you all want a council so much, maybe we can manage," said Billy, looking at the other boys. "All right. When?" hastily accepted Aunt Flo. "I s'pose Mose will freeze some cream for us as usual on Sunday and Thursday, so we'd better say Tuesday, as that gives us ice cream on an off day," interjected Paul, before any one could decide. "All right. Then we can go marketing to Belfast on Monday and spend Tuesday at Rosemary," said Fred. The Tuesday for the council was a lovely day, and Paul took a snapshot of Aunt Flo and her visitors. The nature coups were claimed by Elizabeth and the three younger boys. Then Trixie formally presented a red scalp to the black bears, and Elizabeth followed suit. Paul and Dudley also paid their forfeited locks, so that Fred and Bill had a number of brilliant trophies hanging from their belts. Finally the much longed for ice cream was brought, and the pyramids piled up on the boys' plates received sincere applause and attention. Among the cakes passed around were certain cookies that the boys preferred to any others. So good were they that Billy remarked, "My, but these are the best ever!" "Who do you think baked them?" asked Trixie eagerly. "Not you, anyway," laughed he. "Well, Smarty, we did. Elizabeth and I made the batter, and Edith cut them out and put them in the pans." "Ha! That's nothing. We cook whole meals at our camp," exclaimed Paul. "Yes, sirree. Say, boys, how about that breakfast yesterday, eh?" boasted Dudley. You ought to have tasted that. Billy went over to Islesboro in his launch and shot 5 red squirrels. We skinned and boiled them for breakfast, and maybe they weren't good," said Fred, abetting the younger boys. "What else did you have?" queried Elizabeth. "Fred baked some pancakes, and we ate and ate and ate," asserted Paul, looking at his companions. "I never saw any one eat so much as they did, except at our clam bakes," said Fred. "Well, maybe you baked the pancakes, but Mose was there to advise and start that breakfast going," asserted Trixie. "Who told you so?" cried a number of voices. "We just went over to get something Elizabeth wanted from the island, and you were all gone to Adams's for milk. Mose told us about the squirrels and the funny mistakes you boys made while experimenting on them. And he told us of the towers of pancakes you boys made way with, too." "Do you know, we haven't had our annual clam bake yet," hastily declared Billy. "That's so. As soon as mother comes home we must try and get it started," added Fred. "Oh, Trix, we have the most wonderful time at these bakes!" exclaimed Billy, rolling his eyes and patting his stomach. So, in talking and planning for the clam bake, the thin ice of camp cooking was forgotten, and the character of the boys for being first-class chefs was not completely ruined. End of Chapter 11.
Chapter 12 of Woodcraft Boys at Sunset Island. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Woodcraft Boys at Sunset Island by May Folwell Hoisington and Lillian Elizabeth Roy. Chapter 12. The Pirates of Scilly Ledge. "Say, Fred, did you see the Boston steamer go past this morning?" asked Billy wonderingly one day. "Come to think of it, I didn't." "Neither did I," said Dudley. "Nor I," added Paul. "It gets to be such a habit when the boats go past, up in the morning and down at night, that their absence is quite noticeable," said Fred. But the boys forgot about the failure of the big white steamer to put in her appearance as usual. That afternoon they were out with the captain when a fisherman from Saturday Cove hailed them. "Hey, Captain! The old Katahdin's gone ashore on Scilly Ledge this morning." "You don't tell!" cried the astonished captain. "That's why we didn't see her go by," said Billy. "Can they get her off?" Fred shouted after the informer. "Nah! They tells me she's a total wreck." The boys looked at each other while the same desire sprang up in each heart to visit that wreck. "Can't we go down and see her, Captain?" asked Billy. "Well, it's pretty far out to sea off Monhegan, and besides, the groundswell's bad there," hesitated Captain Ed. "Captain, if Aunt Miriam will lend us the Zeus and Benton goes along, don't you suppose it will be all right?" urged Fred. The captain had hard work hiding his own desire to go, being stirred by inherited beachcombing tendencies. Hence he agreed to the exciting plan. Without the loss of any time, the boys sailed over to Isola Bella and in a pleading manner broached the subject to their aunt. They must not seem too eager or the trip too exciting, or she would refuse her consent. Rumour had travelled swiftly so that Captain Benton had heard and also was stirred by the spirits of his ancestors to visit that wreck. Hence he thought it was perfectly safe and a most delightful excursion for the boys to take. Early the next morning, therefore, the launch set out for Old Scilly Ledge. Down past Camden, around Owl's Head, through the narrow Muscle Ridges Channel, past Whitehead and out to open sea, steered the captain of the Zeus. Well for the boys that the big launch was seaworthy craft that she was. Before they caught sight of the doomed steamer, the groundswell had gotten in its deadly work. 3 seasick lads lay limply on the cushions, feeling that the Zeus was going down, never to climb again, as she dropped into the hollows between the swells. Soon, however, as she rose on the crest of each great wave, the stirring sight of hundreds of craft converging with the Zeus to a common centre revived the drooping spirits of the boys, and the green sensations gradually disappeared. "She must be abandoned all right," remarked Captain Ed. "'Tain't curiosity what brings all them craft here," hinted Captain Benton. The boys pricked up their ears. What did the captains mean? "I always knew them Metinicus and Isle of Holt fellers were pirates at heart," sneered Captain Ed. "Well, you see, it ain't stealin'. Not exactly, you know," argued Benton. "Oh, sure not. Float Sam and Jet Sam's anybody's pickin'. And she's all insured anyhow," conceded Captain Ed. "You don't mean to say that all these folks are here to grab something from that steamer?" cried Fred aghast. "That's just it," replied the captain. "Ooh, if that isn't stealing in the eye of the law, why can't we pick up something too? Just a souvenir, you know," ventured Billy, breathlessly. By this time they were drawing closer to the wreck. Careened over, rolling and crunching in the heavy swells, the Katahdin was too dangerous for close quarters, and in fact that was the only thing that kept the circling boats at a distance from her. The greed of the watchers was stimulated by the stray bits of wreckage that were seen swashing around, and so contagious is the desire to get something for nothing, especially when the law smiles leniently upon the pirate, that the boys and captains in the Zeus, otherwise peaceable law-abiding Americans, now felt the maddening frenzy to secure a prize too. Suddenly a fierce gust of wind and a 7th wave struck the helpless boat at the same time, raising her up only to crash her down amidships on the backbone of Old Scilly. With a rending and splitting heard above the roar of the breakers, the steamer broke in two and began to vomit forth her cargo. After that pandemonium reigned. The boys could never tell just when they too turned into lawless pirates. In the wild scramble for the floating cases from the hold of the steamer, many a launch and boat had the bows stove in. Free fights ensued, and the butts of oars were used with telling effect on the heads of others. Of course, the Zeus did not engage in this warfare, but she soon was piled high with miscellaneous freight. As for the prizes contained in that cargo, it wasn't a time to pick and choose, but a case of grab and get before it sank from sight. A crate floated near the boys, and piercing squeals from inside drew the attention of the pirates of the Zeus to it. "It's a pig!" cried Dudley. "Oh, let's rescue it before it drowns," called Paul. When the captains and Fred and Lee succeeded in hauling the heavy crate on board, poor Piggy's squeals had ceased. "Let's use first aid on it," exclaimed Billy eagerly. "He's a fine-looking shoat, all right," commented Benton. "Let's wrench off the slats on top and get him out. He'll take up less room uncrated," suggested Captain Ed. "We can try first aid on him, then," giggled Paul. As the crate was opened and Piggy removed, Billy said, "I bet he was a prize pig for the Belfast Fair." "Here, Captain, let us look at the address on the crate and see where he was going," exclaimed Fred. But no ink mark was left on the case, and the tag that had been tacked to the wood was soaked off by the water. So the rescuing party were none the wiser after the examination. "Well, roast pig ain't to be sneezed at anyway," said Benton. But just then Piggy revived and slipped from Benton's hold. He started a circus in the launch with all hands trying to catch him, and more than once the boys very nearly fell into the water in their mad scramble to grab him. Finally the unruly passenger was cornered and hog-tied. "We'll give him to Uncle Tom, because none of us islanders can use him," suggested Fred. And so Piggy was destined to find a temporary resting place on the farm at Rosemary. It had taken 3 hours to sail down Old Scilly Ledge, and it was long past lunchtime before the excited pirates thought of anything so commonplace as eating. A large broken box of fancy biscuits reminded them that they could feel hungry now that the first excitement was over, and the sandwiches Mose had packed in the lunch soon disappeared. The erstwhile seasick boys, being hollow clean down to their toes, caused the lunch to melt away like ice in a hot sun. Then followed the slightly soggy and salted crackers. With sighs of regrets, the two captains then suggested that they turn for the homeward trip. "Oh, just one more haul!" cried Billy, spearing for a floating case near at hand. "Where can you find room to stack any more?" asked Benton. "Oh, this is a case of biscuit. Fancy mix too!" exclaimed Billy, having guided the prize to the side of the launch. Without demur, the case of crackers was brought inboard, and then Fred called out, "There's a little box floating away from us. Precious goods come in small packages, you know, so we ought to get that. Another feller's after it. Quick, hurry up!" cried Paul. The pirates on the Zeus won the race, and the small, half-submerged box was carefully lifted aboard. "Now, I insist that we start home," declared Captain Ed. "Even as it is, we won't get there until after dark," added Benton. "Never mind, we've done a big day's work," chuckled Fred. "I should say so. Gee, pigs, crackers and what not," added Billy gloatingly. "Ed, I bet those vultures won't leave a stick on that boat. Why, every little shack down the bay will have one of them red plush chairs from the saloon, and every one on the Mechanicus will be sleeping on good mattresses after they're dried out," grumbled Benton. On the way home, the boys investigated their treasure trove. The small box that had caused such a lively race was found to contain a gross of Ingersoll watches, but most of them were utterly spoiled from the salt water bath. The better ones, packed individually in small close-fitting cases, proved to be in fairly good condition. Oh, what joy to the hearts of these mariners to hear the ticking of a watch on every passenger of the Zeus, a watch that might be consulted as often as one liked without regard to the others. "Here's the last one of the good lot. What shall we do with it?" asked Dudley. "Tie it around the porker's neck," laughed Paul. "Oh, no, let's take it home to Mose. He'll be tickled to pieces with it," exclaimed Billy. So the little box was tucked in Billy's pocket to be given to the appreciative cook. Then the boys turned over another case. "Here, boys, don't open up anything else or the clutter will choke the engine," begged Benton. They laughed at that, but promised to wait for landing before investigating any further. That night, the islanders passed a delirious time amidst the contents of the cases picked up from the Katahdin. The first case opened was found to be packed with woodenware, breadboards, chopping bowls, potato mashers, and such. "Great Scott! Here's enough wood to build a house," said Paul. "I'll tell you what, these oval and round breadboards'll make dandy totems for everyone," cried Billy. "That's what they will. And the mashers will do for the tom-toms when we hold council," added Dudley. "Now don't be silly. You know there wouldn't be any drumhead left in the tom-tom if you boys beat time with one of those wooden potato mashers," said Fred, trying to pry off a slat. "Where are you going?" asked Paul of Billy, who had piled an armful high with wooden dishes. "Give 'em to Mose. He needed some new kitchenware." At that, Paul and Dudley each caught up a wooden bowl and a wooden masher and marched after Billy, beating time for his steps. "Hey, Mose, here's your answer to prayer. I heard you last week saying that you hoped the good Lord would send you some kitchen dishes mighty quick," laughed Billy. "Ah, no deed, no child. Mose never prayed no wicked prayer like that. Maybe dat wreck could be laid to the door over such a prayer, and Mose sure ain't guilty of that. But what I did say was, I wished the dear Lord would take pity on poor Mose and send him some dishes mighty quick. There's a heap of difference," explained the devout cook. "Well, forget the prayer that caused the wreck and come in to see what else we got," teased Dudley at last. Mose was only too pleased to be invited to assist at the prize packages, but he looked askance at the debris that covered the floor of the bungalow. "Why didn't you all wait for morning to unpack this messy stuff out on the ground?" "Wait, my goodness! We could hardly wait to get through supper," exclaimed Billy. While they were talking, the Captain brought in another case which he had wheeled up from the launch. This case must have been consigned to a hardware merchant or some poultry man, as it was filled with wire nests for chickens. "This sure is a lottery," laughed Fred. "Yes, and we lost out on this draw," chuckled Captain Ed. "Well, these can't be used anyway, 'cause we never keep chickens on the island," said Billy regretfully. You might take them over to your Uncle Tom, ventured Paul. He won't need more than 3 or 4, and look at all of these, replied Fred. How many do you suppose there are? Wondered Dudley, and Billy began to unwire one bundle. As he took out one after another of the closely packed wireframes, the boys counted until they found there were 25 in a pack. Say, for pity's sake, don't unwire any more. There's 20 bundles of them in all, laughed the captain. That's 500 wire baskets. Gee, we'd be swamped all right, added Billy. We'll give all the farmers on the mainland and I'll borrow some, said Paul. We might make a good trade on them for eggs and butter, remarked the businessman of the crowd. Ha ha! Mose always said Billy would be a millionaire some day, laughed the cook. I tell you what we might do with some of 'em, now suggested the captain thoughtfully. Last summer I had some old ones that I threw out and my wife filled them with moss and loam, then planted some sort of ferns in them. When they were wired and hung up on the porch, they looked mighty fine, I can tell you. Great! That's just what we'll do for a surprise. We'll hang them all around the bungalow for Mother, cried Billy. And make a lot for Aunt Miriam for lending us the Zeus, added Fred. We can go to Sprague's Cove and dig up some of those swell ferns, and there are whole carpets of thick moss there, said Billy eagerly. Then we've found a use for the nests, sighed Paul, who feared to find any stock on hand valueless. The next case was filled with stationer's assorted goods. Alas, the briny had done its worst here. The pens, knife blades, and the wire paper holders were already rusting, and besides that, a peculiar glutinous slime covered the articles in the case. It was this same sour odor that, coming from inside of the case, had first attracted the boys' attention to the box when the captain brought it in. Wire baskets. Gee, do we need any more? Asked Dudley sarcastically. What's all this gooey slime? Wondered Paul, disgusted with the mess he got all over his hands as he tried to pull out a package. As the boys delved deeper into the case and brought out boxes and stationery, all patterned by red and blue and black ink, which had soaken through from broken bottles, they found the horrid smelly jelly diluted by salt water to have mixed in with everything else. Ah, the mystery's solved, cried Fred, lifting a broken carton of paste powder from the case. Ugh, it's got ready-made in the ocean and spread itself wherever it was not wanted, said Paul with disgust. Let me take care of that goo case, offered Mose. I can clean 'em all out in the morning and maybe fin a heap of paper so's Paul and Dudley can write home every week, regular. All right, let Mose do it, laughed Billy. But I'm tellin' you right here, if I seen a nice penknife with a white pearl handle, I sure will take it for pay. Anything you find, Mose, go as far as you like, promised Fred. Mose left the cutlery in kerosene overnight, thereby cleaning off the rust and polishing up the items. The paper and other passably good articles he cleaned off fairly well and kept them on hand for the children to use. The last of the case contained dire disappointment. The groceries therein were discovered to be utterly ruined. Salt, sugar, cereals, coffee and other foodstuffs. Now I'm glad we stopped and got that last case of crackers, declared Dudley. So am I, added Paul, hiding a wide yawn behind a case. Is this all now? Demanded Billy. All for tonight, I guess, said Fred. Gee, but I'm glad. I'm dog-tired, sighed Billy. We all are. Let's go to bed, cried Paul. The next day, the Iola Bella and Rosemary contingent came early to hear all about the piratical raid on the seas about Scilly Ledge, and the boys relived again their thrilling adventure in relating them to their interested audience. The story told, Mose appeared with lemonade and crackers. Oh, just the thing, ladies. Won't you partake of our Pirate's Prize brand of biscuits, sultanas filled with ocean currents, and genuine saltines fresh from the Katahdin? Joked Fred, bowing. Of course the ladies laughed, and while they all munched the crackers, the boys spoke of hanging baskets they expected to have ready soon. Oh, and by the way, boys, Uncle Tom told me to be sure and thank you for the pig, although he was quite overwhelmed at first. Fancy having a nice fat pig fished out of the ocean for you, exclaimed Aunt Edith. He's going to keep it, isn't he? Anxiously asked Paul. Oh, certainly, for a time anyways. We have called it Katahdin, for it proved its undisputed right to the name by making such free use of the last syllable in the name. This amused the boys tremendously, and they felt relieved to find that Uncle Tom had gladly accepted the foundling. Speaking of fern baskets, where are you going for the ferns? Asked Elizabeth. We thought of going to Sprague's Cove for them, replied Fred. Oh, do take us with you then, cried Miriam. "Yes, Fred, do. Then I can go off on a little hunting trip by myself," said Billy eagerly. "As long as you don't shoot anywhere near us, it will suit me," warned Fred. "Oh, I'll keep a mile or more away. Anyway, you know I'm not Paul or Dudley, who hit a mark at right angles to their target," teased Billy. So the girls were permitted to go on the cruise and help dig up some of the beautiful ferns and wonderful moss found at Sprague's Cove. A keg full of leaf mold was also taken for the nourishment of the roots of the fern. Meantime, Billy planned to land at Adams Beach and hunt for rabbits and red squirrels. But before he quite reached the shore, he saw a black, dog-like head glide through the water. It dove, but it reappeared again and Billy stopped the engine of his launch. Quietly he waited, for he knew the curiosity of the seal would draw it nearer and perhaps in range of his rifle. He took great care not to show the gun and thus stood waiting. His knowledge of the habits of the harbour seal proved to be correct, for the smooth, dark head popped up quite near the bow of the launch. He fired, but the seal sank, leaving a pool of blood on the surface of the water. Billy knew that he had lost his prey unless it was lying in shallow enough water for him to retrieve it, for a dead seal sinks like lead. He slowly motored over to the place where the red tinge was now mingling with the water, and sounded carefully with an oar. "Oh joy! I guess I can get him!" cried Billy to himself as the oar touched bottom at about 6 feet depth. "It's high water now, too, and that's lucky for me," he soliloquized. When the water had cleared, Billy plainly saw the dead seal lying on a ledge. He pondered the situation well, then decided to wait and watch the seal, for he feared that with the wash of the ebb tide, he would never find it again if he left the place. When the returning mossbacks came in sight with their launch, he would hail them to come and help him. Finally, the chugging of the engine was heard and Billy hailed the captain and Fred. "I've got a seal! Come and help me get him!" yelled Billy contradictorily. With the captain and Fred aiding, Billy used the oar to push a slip noose under and around the seal's tail and hauled it up to the surface. With considerable labour, it was pulled on board, but its bleeding head was left hanging over the side of the launch. Once at the island, the seal was hauled up on the rocks and Billy started to skin it. Uncle Tom came for the girls before this work had been completed, and they waved hands at the busy boy, shouting as they left the float stage. "Good riddance to the seal! We are not sorry to leave that awful smell. Why, the whole island is permeated with it." "'Tis rather sickening, isn't it?" grinned Billy, standing up to stretch his lame back. "It's just as well Mother isn't here now." The next few days were devoted by Billy and Fred to the curing and tanning of the seal skin. It was no easy job either. The scraping alone occupied many hours, but nothing seemed like too much trouble for such a trophy. "Billy, did you know there's a bounty on the harbour seals?" asked Captain Ed one morning. "If you just take the chin whiskers to the post office at Sabbath Day Harbour, they'll give you $1 for them." "Me for that $1?" declared Billy. So that afternoon Captain Ed handed Billy a written statement for evidence that the boys caught the seal. The next day the boys made another trip to Islesboro, and much to the young Nimrod's satisfaction, the $1 was forthcoming without delay. "There won't be any seals left in a few years from now," remarked the elderly postmaster to Billy. "Wall, they come near to ruin the salmon fisheries and something had to be done about 'em," added a sailor man. "Yes, sir," said a fisherman who lounged near the door. "I've seen a salmon weir just hung full of salmon heads, all that them seals left the fishermen. But I always kinder liked the seals and it's pretty they had to be killed off," said the postmaster sympathetically. A scornful glance from the fisherman and a sniff from the sailor were the only answers vouchsafed the remark. Fred and Billy finished the work on the seal that day, and the next morning the captain said he had the collar ready for the flagpole. The boys helped him with the work, and when all was ready, the snowy staff was successfully raised. Now everyone was eager to see the flag wave from the top, but they had agreed to wait for their mother's homecoming. To divert their attention, the captain made a suggestion. "Who's going to help me whip the ends of the new cable for the Medric, sailor fashion?" So they worked gaily at this for a time, but what boy can handle a fine piece of rope and resist the excitement of having a swing? "Captain, lend us your new rope for a while," asked Billy. "What for?" "I have a plan for dandy swing and besides, it will take the lay out of your cable," replied Billy diplomatically. The captain chuckled and consented. Indeed, he offered to help the boys secure the ends, but they knew they could manage. The swing proved to be all Billy had hoped for. In fact, so thrilling was the experience of that swing that the captain regretted his cooperation, for he felt there lurked too much risk to life and limb while it was being used. Hence he claimed the right to take it the following day for the Medric. But how the boys did enjoy it while it lasted. Billy demurred vehemently as Captain Ed said he had to use the cable, so the captain craftily hinted, "You ain't been over to Rosemary after them porcupines yet. I suppose your Uncle Tom's orchard is near about spoiled by now." "Gee, that's so. I ought to go after them at once. I have to go over to the cove for supplies. Mose is forever wanting a yeast cake, it seems. You might go with me and stay all night at your Uncle Tom's and come back tomorrow with a fine quill pig, eh?" continued the subtle captain. Mose stood by watching the boys swing and he heard the conversation. He grinned for he knew the captain's tactics well, but he took a certain pride in the looks of his islanders. "Child, you sure must change them old duds if you're gonna make a visit. I ain't going to low you for Martian to look like a sure enough tramp. Your hair needs trimming too." "Oh, pshaw, Mose, what difference does it make? It will be night and I'm going hunting so no one will see me," argued Billy. "Hush your complaining now, Bill. Come in and mind your guardian," laughed Mose encouragingly. "Go on, Billy, you know he's right. Rosemary is not a camp and who knows who'll be visiting there. You'd disgrace us and your relations if you were seen in the duds that came out of the Ark," declared Fred. Billy realized he was in the minority on this vote, so he submitted to Moses' barbering, but with much grumbling. "Such a lot of fussing for a hunting trip," he observed. But the hair cutter paid no attention to the complaint just then, as he had his mind full of other plans. "Whilst I've got ban in the barber business, your boys come along this hairdressing parlor late style cuts." "Ouch! That was my ear. Darn your latest style cuts!" cried Billy impatiently. "Was that your ear, child? Sure enough, they seems to grow just like your hair. I disremembered they was so big and that how come I teched and whiffed the shears." A laugh followed this joke on Billy and that young man departed to dress in a ruffled frame of mind. The next morning about 9 o'clock, Paul discovered the captain and Billy coming towards the island in the chugging boat. He called to the other boys and they all ran down to Treasure Cove to meet the two sailors. On the launch stood Billy grinning his widest and holding aloft a porcupine. As he came within hearing he shouted, "Oh, it's such a cinch to catch porcupines. Never got anything so dead easy. Uncle Tom shot one too, grandly." After coming ashore, the captain handed Fred a letter which bore the Boston postmark and began, "How Kola Vita Tonkan." The others stood at hand to hear any possible news from Mrs. Remington, and Fred hastily perused the pages. "Well, I'll be bliffed. Mother writes that she met Mrs. Baker and Mrs. Hubert in Boston, and they are all going to take a motor trip from their camp up through Maine." "Are they coming here?" queried Billy eagerly. "Later, maybe. Mother says she invited them all to come and spend the day with us on the island, and they seem quite taken with the idea." "Does she say whether any of the girls or boys will be with them on the trip?" asked Dudley. "Maybe my sister Hilda will be with them," added Paul. "I don't know, because Mother merely says they were attending a suffrage convention in Boston. You know what ardent members both Mrs. Baker and Mrs. Hubert are. And they had a nice long talk, but nothing more is said in this letter," said Fred. "I wish the doctor would come. He's awfully good fun," said Billy. "We won't know until Mother gets home. Then she'll tell us all about it. Then we could have that swell clam bake, eh?" said Paul. "Do you know, we've got 10 big lobsters in the car now. I'll bet we will have lot more by the time Mother gets home," exclaimed Billy. This hope spurred the boys to even greater efforts to bait the traps enticingly and tend out for results. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Woodcraft Boys at Sunset Island. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Woodcraft Boys at Sunset Island by May Folwell Hoisington and Lillian Elizabeth Roy. Chapter 13. Thieves in the Night. Billy had a habit of waking about dawn and stepping out of his tent to look around and gauge the weather for the day. So it happened about 3 o'clock one morning that he indulged in his usual nocturnal survey. The bay was calm in that still dark hour before dawn. Bill was about to retire after making his prognostications when the muffled chugging of a motor launch and the sound of a boat bumping against something in the back bay off the float stage instantly rendered him alert. He knew the islanders were wrapped in slumber, so he investigated, creeping down under the cover of the firs to a vantage point near the shore. It was too dark to see anything, but the muffled sounds convinced Billy that somebody was monkeying with their precious lobsters. Quietly he stole back and woke the captain and the boys. With many cautions for silence, they slipped into trousers and sweaters, thrust feet into sneakers, and rushed to surprise the marauders, Billy not forgetting his rifle. The unavoidable sounds made by the islanders in leaving the float stage were warning enough, so before they were well off in Billy's launch, the strange craft was flying toward the south. "It's up with our main topsails, lads, and after her away," sang Billy in his glory as he gave the engine more gas. They could not seem to lessen the distance between the escaping thieves and their own boat. However, even though the pursuers, knowing the local waters well, were able to take some short cuts. "Well, their launch is a little speedier than mine," woefully admitted Billy. "But they're not gaining much, Bill." "Let's keep it up to the finish," urged Fred. Down through Gilkey's Harbour, out past Job's Island, and into East Penobscot Bay, the thieves led the chase. "Say, Captain, can't I fire a shot across their bows?" begged Billy. "Might as well, son," replied the Captain. But the thieves paid no attention to this nautical command to stop. "They must be heading for Pulpit Harbour or North Haven," declared the Captain, taking his bearings. Billy simply couldn't stand the thought of their getting away. "Oh, Captain, just let me take one shot at their boat." The Captain hesitated too long, for silence gives consent. So Billy, quick to take advantage of it, aimed for the engine of the fleeing launch. "Gee whiz, you hit it!" yelled Paul excitedly. "You winged her all right," admitted Captain Ed with a grin of satisfaction now that the deed was done. After that, they drew up on the crippled boat and were close behind when she dashed in behind the big rock that marks the entrance to this blind harbour on North Haven. Then the thieves beached their launch and took to the woods. When the Sunset Islanders landed and examined the deserted launch, they found she was nearly out of gasoline as well as having had one of her spark plugs shot away. "Guess she just had to put in here. She couldn't go much farther," said Fred. "I don't believe they're any Pulpit Rock fellers. I know all the folks around here 'cause my wife's a North Haven woman, you know," remarked the Captain. "Ah, joy! Here's our lobsters!" shouted Dudley with great relief. "And what's this?" cried Paul, holding up the cushions and steamer rugs from Uncle Billy's launch. "Well, I swan!" breathed the Captain amazed. "Lobsters is one thing, but when it comes to taking chattels, that's another." "What are we going to do now, Cap'n?" asked Billy. "I'm awfully hungry," hinted Paul. "Guess it must be most noon," ventured Dudley. The Captain and Fred laughed and assured the boys that it couldn't be more than 6 or 7 o'clock. The sun was shining gloriously and being up so early made the boys think it was ages since the hurry call for the chase. "We'll have breakfast at my father-in-law's," was the Captain's welcome announcement, indicating a white house that showed above the trees on the point. "Let's take out our spark plug as well as the one left in the other launch," advised Fred, acting upon his suggestion. Captain Jotham, Captain Ed's father-in-law, was a jolly old man with a fringe of white whiskers framing his apple-red face, while his upper lip was carefully shaven. "Well, well! Hain't seen ye since a month o' Sundays," was his hearty welcome to his son-in-law. Come in and set." Then the old Captain's motherly wife appeared and soon after, the hungry mariners were stoking up on coffee and doughnuts, with 2 kinds of pie cut in generous triangles. The boys exchanged looks of intense delight. The dream of their lives come true. They had heard about New Englanders eating pie and doughnuts for breakfast, but they had deemed it a legend, for they had never had an opportunity to test the truth. Now they found they were quite equal to the fact, although Mrs. Remington would have been horrified at her boys eating such a morning meal. When the story of the getaway and pursuit of the thieves was finished, Captain Jotham planned with Captain Ed how to capture the marauders. "Anyway, Ed, I'm the constabule, you know." "Sure 'nough, and you'll be doin' your duty to nab them rascals," assented Captain Ed. So armed with an old Winchester, Constable Jotham Heald left the house followed by the rest of the party, Billy also armed with his trusty rifle. Hearing the exciting story, one neighbor after another joined the posse in the quest. "Say, Jotham," bawled an old salt just back from Rockland. "Betcher them fellers air the same as is wanted for other things than lobsters." "That's right, Jotham. I hear tell thar war a launch stolen down Camden way. Thar's a reward out for news of the thieves and the launch. Shouldn't wonder but what this is it," added another hearty fisherman as they passed the thieves' craft. The hope of reward added to the zest of the pursuit, and before they left the shore, every active or able member of the settlement had joined the posse and had spent that reward. Meantime, the thieves had reached a remote part of the wooded shore and, fearing capture, had hidden in a natural cave. Here they collected a heap of stones to use for ammunition and provided heavy clubs in case of attack. They had not anticipated such an army, however, but had intended rushing the boys, figuring that the single rifle of the offensives could be rendered useless by the sudden surprise. The trail grew clearer to the home defenders as they neared the granite cave. Even Paul could see that the cobblestones had recently been removed from the ground. The two fugitives, hearing a babble of many voices, peered from the gloom of the cave. When they saw the crowd headed by a constable, as was distinctly shown by the badge of office shining resplendent from his flowered suspenders, with a gun, they looked at each other in fear. "In the name of the law, surrender!" bawled Captain Jotham, aiming his Winchester at the dark opening of the cave. With the actual cowardliness of the unarmed criminal, the two men sneaked out, holding up their trembling hands in token of submission. "Where's them bracelets, Ed?" shouted the constable. And the two men were handcuffed while the crowd looked on in intense satisfaction. It was the first time the boys had ever seen handcuffs used, and it had a most subduing effect on their plastic minds. It was high noon when the posse dispersed before the Heald homestead, and hunger added to fatigue had so quieted the islanders that they presented quite a contrast to the eager rush and hullabaloo of the morning. Captain Jotham's wife, accustomed as she was to hearty appetites, had provided amply for the demand. Hot biscuits, jam, honey, preserves, and more pie fraternized on the checkered red and white tablecloth, while smothered haddock and boiled potatoes provided pyramids of delicious if humble provender. And full justice was done that meal by the representatives of the law. The topic of conversation centered about the reward, and Captain Jotham promised to take charge of the division so that the islanders would receive their exact share. "But don't set your hopes too high, boys. You won't be millionaires on that reward, if we get it," said the constable. "Why, the whole launch ain't worth more'n 100, or even less," added Captain Ed. That morning, Mose had been awakened by the noise of Billy's launch as the boys started in pursuit of the thieves. By the time he was half dressed, however, and down by the float, only a chugging of the two engines could be heard by the nonplussed cook. The morning passed without sight or sound of the islanders, so Mose became worried. He tramped back and forth from Treasure Cove to the float stage and then down to the south end, dragging the spyglass with him. He almost forgot to eat, so deserted and worried was he. Then late in the afternoon, when it seemed to him that he was doomed to remain a second Robinson Crusoe and Man Friday combined in one, he heard a faint echo over the water and anxiously glued his eye to the spyglass. There were familiar forms approaching in Billy's launch. Mose was so relieved to find them all safe at home that the unusually wide grin on his generous mouth almost met at the back of his round head and elicited a warning from the captain. "Take care, Mose, the top of your head will come off." The whole thrilling tale of the adventure was told Mose while they all sat about the supper table, and many were the interruptions in the telling as one or another boy remembered a detail of that chase and capture. While waiting for dessert, the boys nodded and dozed, and finally Fred yawned and got up from the table. "Say, Mose, I'm so tired my jaws won't move. Keep my dish of pudding for breakfast." When the other boys followed Fred's action, Mose could hardly believe his eyes and ears. Not wait for their favorite pudding! The next morning Anna appeared with her charge, Teddy. "I got a letter from your mother yesterday that she'll be home soon. so I thought I'd better come over and help Mose clear away the two apparent traces of your bachelor hall." Although the boys would not admit it, they were glad to see little Teddy and Anna again, and Fred picked up his brother and carried him off for the time the governess was occupied in helping Mose. As they worked, Mose remarked, "Deed, I think it's high time the missus is comin' home. I tek notice that none ob dese ructions o' bein' pirates or shootin' thieves happen when she's here." "I agree with you there, Mose, but I think we're lucky to have any islanders sound and alive to meet her at the homecoming," added Anna with a sigh. The day the lady of the island was expected, the boys started for Rosemary to meet her there. Everything had been left in readiness at the foot of the flagpole so that Mose could hoist the flag when the signal came from the returning launch. At that signal, the young islanders were to sing "My Country 'Tis of Thee" and "Our America," while the flag was hoisted and waved from its position on the big rock of Treasure Cove. Everything went off as planned, and Mrs. Remington was greatly pleased at the demonstration of patriotism shown by the young folks. "I don't know how it happened that your father and I never had the broken flagstaff replaced this summer, but so much takes place every time he's with us that it naturally was left for a time when there was nothing else to do, and that never happens," explained Mrs. Remington in apology for the neglect, then added, "Now, however, we have a far better staff than the old one, and I want to thank you for the forethought and labor." "You must thank Captain Ed too. He helped a lot," said truthful and loyal Billy. "Indeed I do, and he knows it, and for all his care of you," said his mother, taking Captain Ed's hand in hers. At the earnest words of appreciation, the Captain's memory reviewed recent events. Piracy and posse were hardly to be considered as acts of caretaking, and the conscientious Captain's sense of justice rebuked him in accepting the gratitude. "Oh well," he thought to himself, "all's well that ends well, and no one got in trouble." Elizabeth and Edith had accompanied their mother home and were glad to be back on their dear old island, although they had enjoyed their visit immensely. The morning following Mrs. Remington's return, Elizabeth said, "Mother, we want our annual clam bake and it can't be postponed much longer 'cause Trixie is going back home." "Well, Uncle Tom is coming over today to give the boys another lesson in target shooting, and we will give him the invitation to carry to the Cove people, and we can tell the Iola Bella family about it when we go there for dinner tonight." "Gee, I'm glad we got those lobsters of ours back again," murmured Billy. During the next few days, everyone worked hard to have this clam bake surpass those of former years. Clams were dug, fish were caught, the Captain's broilers were requisitioned, while Rosemary and Iola Bella promised to supply the ice cream and cakes. The day before the fête, Elizabeth was brooding deeply while assisting her mother with candy making. Suddenly she said, "Oh dear, I do wish Father could be with us tomorrow." Her mother smiled and said, "Well, wish hard enough and see what happens. We used to say, if wishes were horses, all beggars might ride. But you might change that to say, if wishes are motors, our father will arrive." Elizabeth eyed her mother suspiciously and saw a look that caused her to clap her hands. "Oh, Mother, goody good! I know he's coming!" And away flew Elizabeth to spread the wonderful news to all on the island. "Say, that's the best yet!" cried the boys. "There's no one can broil lobsters like Father," declared Billy. "And we want him to award that prize he offered for the biggest one," added Dudley. "That's right. He said in a month's catch and the time is up," admitted Fred. 11 a.m. of the great feast day found Mr. Remington at Rosemary, the little plan of the extra weekend visit having been found possible of fulfillment. Fred and Billy met their father in the new launch. On the trip to Sunset Island, Billy proudly displayed its speed and his efficiency in managing the motor. Fred regaled his father with a very full account of the pirates and the chase of the thieves to Pulpit Harbor. As the elder of the trio listened to the story, he chuckled and thought to himself, "Chips off the old block." But very seriously he remarked, "Boys, what did your mother say to all this?" "Oh, Father, we haven't told her all we told you," gasped they. and by the time Mrs. Remington did hear most of the details of the exploits, the flight of time had shed its halo about the daring and possible dangers her boys had incurred. That noon, the sun shone down upon a fleet of visiting craft loaded with eager and hungry clam bakers. Not only were the Rosemary and Iola Bella families fully represented, but many guests also accompanied them. Mr. Remington broiled lobsters, Captain Ed steamed clams, the boys dished fish chowder, and Mose broiled young chickens until it seemed the world would be feasted that day. But all disappeared as if by magic, and still the clam bakers found out-of-way corners where cake and ice cream could be stored. At last, at peace with all earthly things, the visitors sat down to enjoy the entertainment about to be furnished by the Woodcrafters. Our first number on the program will be a moving picture drama of the Katahdin Pirates, announced Fred. And a realistic scene took place in which one of the male visitors was dragged out and became a helpless victim of piracy as practiced by Sunset Islanders. The production was one of Fred's first attempts at playwriting and received due applause as such. Little Red Riding Hood was then acted out, but the wolf looked suspiciously like the cinnamon bear of the masked ball on Iola Bella. The woodchopper played his part so enthusiastically that it brought an encore. And so Edith was once more swallowed in the steamer rugs of her grandmother's bed, and once more disgorged. After this, Mr. Remington very seriously announced that the prize offered by him for the largest and heaviest lobster came near to being twins. The only point that saved this awful monstrosity was the fact that a claw on one was larger than those of the other. Thus Paul was recompensed for his encounter with the lobster's claw during the first catch of the season. Paul was so delighted with winning the first prize that he went about showing each guest the claws of the fine lobster he had caught, and promising Trixie a print of the photograph he had taken of it the day before. Dancing in the council ring helped digestion, and the Victrola Uncle Tom brought over that day furnished music. Among other farewells that evening, Trixie's were specially prolonged as she was to leave Rosemary on the morrow. During his unexpected visit of 3 days, Mr. Remington took an active interest in the target practice, and the boys received many important and wise advices. With target practice, fishing, canoeing, and other sports, the days flew by, while weekly councils in the ring marked the attainment of woodcraft honors. The outdoor life had tanned and hardened Paul and Dudley, so that they were a credit to the island. Moreover, the boys were now of real service in camp life, having learned to row, be of help in sailing, expert in swimming, knowing something of first aid, and being able to cook a simple camp meal. Then came a letter in the morning mail one day, and upon reading it, Mrs. Remington announced, "Mrs. Baker says the trip is all arranged. The girls of Wiki Chioki Band and the boys of Grey Fox Band are crazy to come with Dr. Baker and Mr. Hubert when they motor to Maine. So she has changed her plans of coming with the doctor." "Oh, that's too bad. I know she would have enjoyed a visit with you, Mother," said Elizabeth. "What will they do then?" asked Billy eagerly, trying to hide his pleasure at hearing that Fiji and Bob Baker would accompany the doctor instead of Mrs. Baker. "Why, Mr. Hubert will take the big touring car and take Janet, Zan Baker, Nita Brampton, Elena Marsh, and Paul's sister Hilda, the original 5 who started Wikichioki Band of Wako tribe, while Dr. Baker will use his new 7-passenger car to carry Fiji and Bob Baker, Jack Hubert, Harold Everett, and the luggage." "Why, Jane and Jack Hubert are with their mother at Woodchuck Camp in the Adirondacks," exclaimed Elizabeth. "Yes, but Mrs. Baker and Miss Miller are going from the city to the Hubert camp and visit there while Jane and Jack take the 2 places in the cars to come on here with the other Woodcrafters," explained Mrs. Remington. Wild expressions of delight came from every boy and girl present, and then Billy quieted them with a practical remark. "Say, those bands won't let us put anything over on them in a Grand Council, I bet." "That's right. We ought to put on steam and show the Grey Foxes what we have done this summer," cried Dudley. "Fiji Baker told my sister that they meant to saw wood on the farm this summer, so's they could show some work at the Grand Council in New York in the fall. added Paul. What's more, they must have known of this visit some time ago and been hitting it up to show off when they get here, suggested Fred. Say boys, wouldn't it be great fun to hold one mighty council with the Pentagoet tribe as hosts together with the girls of the big lodge of Waco tribe and their little lodge where Paul, Edith and Teddy first started in woodcraft work, volunteered Elizabeth. Don't forget the grey foxes too, added Dudley. Oh yes, let's. I want to show Hilda how I have improved this summer, urged Paul. The others smiled encouragingly at the boy in whom there surely had been miracles wrought since he joined Woodcraft. In place of the whining and discontented ways, he had acquired a happy optimism. The shirking of duties was now a forgotten habit. The irregular eating, oversleeping, prevarications and other undesirable qualities were now gone for good. And good normal ideas and character-forming exercises took their place. Mrs. Baker said that the doctor had been so overworked that he needs a change. So Mr. Hubert planned this outing to entice him. They will motor from the Adirondacks in easy stages and then spend the third weekend of August in Camden so that we can have them over to visit the island for a day at least, said Mrs. Remington, looking again at the letter from Mrs. Baker. If we hold that last grand council when the visiting tribes are here, why not let that occasion be used to crown Fred a Sagamore? He has just won his 24th feather with the sailing coup, suggested Elizabeth eagerly. That's a splendid idea, Lizzie, cried Billy, using that tabooed nickname for his sister. We can have some grand water sports as well as other fun, instantly quoth Fred, to cover the too evident pleasure he felt at the proposition. We can have a spearing the sturgeon, a canoe tag, and a tub tilting contest as well as a talk fest and other fun, said Dudley, anxious to add his quota. Say, don't you boys go and forget we girls are in on this council, warned Elizabeth with a menacing look. Of course, responded Paul magnanimously. And we are going to claim honors for different things too. I'm going to finish my hostess and Chingabi degrees as well as my handicraft coups, continued Elizabeth. I guess those girls of Waco tribe will have some stunts to show too, added Edith. I think I will plan a program that will give each woodcrafter time and opportunity to show what he or she has done this summer, suggested Mrs. Remington. Yes, mother, do that, came a chorus of voices. So the lady of the island produced an elaborate program that later was entered in the tally book as one of the grand councils, and the best ever held on the island. From that day until the time the expected tourists were to arrive, many hours were given to finishing up the lists for claiming coups and honors. Birds, flowers, insects, and fish were catalogued and learned by everyone until the required number for each coup or honor were secured. Athletics and camp crafts were displayed to the necessary witnesses until Fred declared that he would demand the pay for the office for recording secretary if the writing kept up much longer. But all mundane things have an end, and so has the waiting for an important event. Uncle Bill and Mr. Remington met at last on their insular plane just before the arrival of the guests at Camden. They proved to be of great assistance when it came to arranging the rules and regulations of the water sports planned. Then the day the touring cars arrived at Rosemary, every islander was up and ready to jump into the launch immediately after breakfast. They intended to act as escort for Uncle Tom's powerboat, which would convey the visitors. The council ring had been elaborately decorated with totems painted on the round and oval breadboards salvaged from the wrecked Katahdin, and flags waved in the breeze, the glorious stars and stripes evident above all. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Woodcraft Boys at Sunset Island. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Woodcraft Boys at Sunset Island by May Folwell Hoisington and Lillian Elizabeth Roy. Chapter 14. The 24th Feather. Early in the morning of the festive day, Mose came to Mrs. Remington with a question expressed in his troubled eyes. We ain't got dishes enough, nohow, for the big crowd you all is expectin', said he. "Why, Mose, what about all those shooks of wooden plates salvaged from the wreck, and the other wooden things?" said she. "Oh, I didn't know you all would want to use them for New York company," apologized Mose, who wanted to put the best foot foremost with expected strangers. "You know, it isn't the dishes they'll notice, Mose, but what's on them," declared Mrs. Remington wisely. "Ah, s'pose so," conceded the half-convinced cook. The great convocation having safely arrived on Sunset Island, the morning was devoted to all sorts of athletics and water sports contests. The Grey Fox boys acquitted themselves admirably for such young beginners in woodcraft, and they seized the chance in the presence of so many witnesses to win coups for chinning the bar, hop, step and jump, and other games. The canoe tag was a laughable affair. Naturally, the contestants wore bathing suits. Uncle Tom and Uncle Bill loaned their canoes to the visitors for the day. "Tell you what, boys, this makes me feel young again," exclaimed Uncle Bill as he laughed at certain tricks. "Why, Uncle Bill, you're not old," defended Billy. "No, indeed, he's just as young as any of us," said Fred. "About as young as Teddy, for instance," laughed Mrs. Remington. "Yes, as young and as foolish," added Aunt Miriam. And Uncle Bill quickly diverted everyone's attention to a beautiful schooner plowing through the waves of the bay. That day the luncheon was a picnic affair, for all of the Rosemary and Iola Bella relatives brought huge hampers of food. Immediately after the launch, a cleanup brigade got rid of the debris before the final preparations were made for the Grand Council. Then the boys' and girls' tents were filled with excited woodcrafters, adding the finishing touches to their ceremonial costumes. For whatever else was lacking in the suitcases of the Waco girls and Grey Fox boys, it was not the tiniest or bulkiest item of their Woodcraft Council robes. No, indeed. 3 o'clock found a goodly company completely circling the Council place. Besides relatives and families of the captains present, other visitors had arrived after luncheon. Vita Tonkan opened the Council and called upon Fiji, the chief of the Grey Foxes, to make the ceremonial rubbing stick fire, also appointing Zan Baker, founder of Wiki-Chioki Band, tally keeper of the Council, thus conforming to the conditions of courtesy and cooperation. When the chief of the Council called for reports of scouts, a surprise was afforded the Pentagoets. Captain Ed Rose saluted, was recognized, and began in an official woodcraft manner. "Oh, Chief, I have to report that Constable Jotham Hield sent word that $15 reward awaits at the Camden police station for you boys' share of the money paid by the owner of the recovered launch." After the excited applause had subsided, Billy sprang up, saluted, and inquired earnestly, "Oh, Chief, I would like to ask the Captain if we aren't going to get anything for helping capture those thieves." Everyone in the Council laughed at Billy's mercenary tendencies. "Oh, Chief, I will answer the young brave's question," cried Uncle Bill, now jumping up. "We all admire and value the astuteness of this young detective's work, and I fear that my namesake has had his hopes buoyed high from having read of the exorbitant rewards obtained by city techs. However, let me assure him that most of those sums are press stories, and the long green is seldom seen by the hard-plugging officers whose families have to live according to the low-cost menus furnished by some philanthropic magazines on 2.5 cents a day." Billy's face had gradually been changing its expression of eagerness to disappointment, so the Captain explained. The talk of a reward for the thieves was mostly just talk. In fact, the launch owner added an extra 5 to the $5 reward for catching the rascals. But we were quite a posse, you know, so it only amounted to 37 cents apiece when divided. Fumbling through his pockets, the conscientious Captain finally brought forth a yellow cotton bag, once filled with cat plug, but now elevated to the position of a bank. The constable had made an exact division of spoils, grading down to some odd pennies, and this was counted out upon the desk of the tally keeper. The boys were slightly disappointed at the sudden collapse of the financial investment they had dreamed about, but they were good losers and insisted that Captain Ed share the reward with them. When order was once more restored, Uncle Tom made his report on target practice. Amid prolonged applause, The first prize was a pocket rifle and was awarded to Billy. The second prize was a sheath knife which went to Dudley. Under the heading of unfinished business, Vita Tonkan called upon the Pentagoets and visitors present at the Black Bear Day to deliver the rest of the scalps still due the victors in that contest. Uncle Bill rose and said, "Oh Chief, I permitted my hair to grow all of the time I was away from here. Now behold the result." As he spoke, he held aloft a magnificent pendant brush of long shining hair which he had made to order. This truly royal trophy was then solemnly hung on the Black Bear totem pole back of the Chief's chair. In turn, the rest of the scalps were hung beneath it. Uncle Tom and some of the visitors having provided variegated locks, crimson, yellow, green, purple, and blue tassels of horsehair. "How, how!" sounded amid laughter in the council ring. "Any honours to be claimed?" questioned the Chief. Fiji and Bob stood up and presented the signed papers for a canning coup each. They had joined the Government Canning Club and at Wikichioki Farm that summer had canned 12 quarts each of strawberries, cherries, and raspberries, making the 3 dozen necessary for a coup. "When will you give a demonstration of your club work? I'd like to be one of the judges and chief taster," asked Uncle Bill. This gave the Woodcrafters an idea for a Thanksgiving exhibition which they really carried out the ensuing winter. Then Dudley, Paul, Billy and Fred claimed the coup for catching and salting fish, each having more than the 25 to their account. Vita Tonkan having awarded these coups, a question was raised as to the fitting person to award the honour to him. "A chief must receive honours from another chief," announced Zan, the tally keeper. "Will the Grey Fox Chief award this honour to the chief of the Pentagoet tribe?" added she, turning to her brother. Fiji acquitted himself with dignity, although it was the first time that he had been called upon to act in this capacity. Various nature and handcraft coups were claimed by both girls and boys, and Elizabeth, representing her home tribe of the Pawamis, was awarded the degrees of hostess and sistercraft. Edith, Dudley and Paul each claimed a coup for knowing 25 fish, the 2 boys announcing that, before they left the island that summer, they hoped to have their grand coups for sleeping out of doors 60 successive nights. "If I hadn't had to go to Rosemary and sleep in Aunt Edith's house when Mother went to Boston, I could have won the grand coup too," grumbled Edith. Someone wondered why Vita Tonkan wore only his plain headband at this important council, and it was now explained. Billy arose and said, "I, Shingabis of the Black Bear tribe, in behalf of Vita Tonkan of the Black Bear tribe, claim coup for sailing without expert help 150 miles in a season, witnessed by Captain Ed Blake, Moses Jackson, and Elizabeth Remington." A pause was broken by Shingabis, who gazed solemnly at the circle of attentive faces and said impressively, "This is Vita Tonkan's 24th coup and entitles him to the Sagamore ship." Fiji, slightly overwhelmed at the duties devolving upon him, was again called forward to do service to a brother chief. Zan and Elizabeth handed the Grey Fox Chief the Sagamore's war bonnet and the 24th symbol. Fiji reverently inserted the feather, then holding aloft the coveted plumes, he called upon Elizabeth to read aloud to the council the exploits symbolized by this Sagamore's crown. With a feeling of great pride in her brother's achievement, Pah Lih Oh, the Moon Maid, read as follows: 1. The swimming coup. 2. The grand coup for sleeping 60 successive nights out of doors. 3. The rubbing stick coup. 4. The match fire coup. 5. The grand coup for butterflies. 6. The grand coup for fish. 7. The flower coup. 8. The grand coup for trees. 9. The hop, step and jump coup. 10. Chinning the bar coup. 11. The herald coup. 12. The peace messenger coup. 13. The grand coup for making willow bed. 14. Coup for weaving rush mat. 15. Grand coup for knots. 16. Stargazing coup. 17. Axe man coup. 18. The cooking coup. 19. The catch and salting fish coup. 20. Grand coup for walking 5 miles in 63 minutes and 41 seconds. 21. Grand coup for moths. 22. Grand coup for putting up dumbbell. 23. Coup for making bear for council game. 24. The sailing coup. As the long salvo of hows died away over the water, Fiji ceremoniously placed the crown upon the new-made sagamore. Every Woodcraft boy and girl present then in turn saluted the sagamore Vita Tonkan, which salute was his due every time he entered any council thereafter. In a few words of intense feeling, Vita Tonkan thanked the chief of the Grey Foxes and the council, then took again his place in the chair. The full program was given that day. The Wako tribe rendering the corn dance in a finished and graceful manner. Fiji and Bob stood off Billy and Paul in contests of tub tilting, and then the Pentagoet tribe gave a good account of themselves in singing and movies. Just before the close of that grand council, Uncle Bill, Uncle Tom, and Mr. Remington made a momentous announcement. We have persuaded Dr. Baker and Mr. Hubert, acting as chauffeurs for these Woodcraft visitors, to pronounce the two automobiles out of condition for an immediate departure. Therefore, they have agreed to extend the visit, said Uncle Bill. Yes, the Grey Foxes are going to be the guests of the Sunset Islanders, while the Wacos will visit Iola Bella, continued Mr. Remington. And the doctor and Mr. Hubert are to remain with me at Rosemary, where we three can chaperone the unruly cars, added Uncle Tom. But long before the third announcement was finished, a babel started in the council ring and could only be subdued by the sagamore jumping up and shouting wildly, "Three cheers and a tiger!" The order was obeyed with a vim that deafened all those present, and echoed as far over to Iola Bella, so that Bridget came out of her domain and stood with her hands upon her ample hips, remarking to herself, "Some more av them Injun fussin' oi suppose." Oh, the joys of the next few days! Fishing, sailing, for the visitors preferred sailing to any other sport, and exploring the islands. A visit to the old wreck in Crow Cove, an impromptu clam bake, and dances in the fudge attics of evenings, where Uncle Bill made good his boast to the members of Wako tribe that he was strong for the ladies. On the morning of the last day, however, Dr. Baker and Mr. Hubert silenced all petitions for a longer visit. So the launches were boarded and the visiting Woodcrafters and all of the islanders were soon carried over to Rosemary, where the well-chaperoned cars had been waiting. "Say, Fiji, while the folks are admiring Uncle Tom's garden, supposing we show you boys the farm?" asked Fred. "And we'll show you the little pig we saved from the Katahdin wreck," cried Billy. This idea was acted upon and soon the boys and girls were laughing at the antics of the pig, now in an excellent condition owing to the generosity of the Rosemary refectory. As they all stood near the pen, Fiji began whistling a melody beginning with Yankee Doodle, when, to the amazement of the children, Piggy instantly reared up on his hind legs and danced about, keeping very good time with the whistling. "Well, did you ever!" gasped Zan, turning to look at the others. The boys and the girls of the island were as surprised as she, however, and stood speechless, looking at the object of their unbelief. "Say, that's no fool of a pig! I'm going to try him again!" exclaimed Fiji. Katahdin had dropped to all fours when the musician had stopped whistling and now came snuffling close to the fence for an accustomed apple. "I'll run to the orchard for some apples," cried Billy, while Fiji started to whistle again. Piggy again danced around and around, causing the audience to shriek with laughter. "I bet you anything that's a trick pig!" cried Fred. "And it was crated for the county fair." "Yes, sir," added Paul. "Let me try some other stunts," suggested Fiji, climbing over the fence. Bob handed his brother a stick of wood while the other children waited breathlessly to see the results of the experiment. Fiji ordered in a commanding voice, "Down, Piggy, down!" Immediately the pig lay down upon the ground. "Dead dog, dead!" now called the excited boy, forgetting for the moment that he was not training Vicky, his coolie dog. But Katahdin cared not for the error of names and meekly turned over on his back with all four short legs sticking stiffly upward. A scream of laughter greeted this performance and an apple was fed the eager pig. "Fiji, see if he can play soldier like Vic does," now said Bob. So the stick Fiji held was carefully placed in the crotch of the upright pig's foreleg. The pig was so tame that it showed absolutely no fear of the children, but stood obediently waiting for a command. Whistling Yankee Doodle again, Fiji shouted, "March!" Katahdin ambled clumsily along, carrying the stick for a gun, and the children shouted wildly in their frenzy of delight. They felt that they had saved the seventh wonder of the earth. "Halt!" called Fiji, and the porcine performer obeyed. "Present arms!" But the pig must have been accustomed to a different act, for it instantly grounded arms. Uncles, aunts, and other adults were now hailed to come and witness the great surprise. So Piggy was once more put through his steps to the wonderment of the grown-ups. "I believe this is a valuable pig, children, and perhaps his master was on the Katahdin also, and now is mourning the loss of his pet," said Mrs. Remington. "Suppose we write the Eastern Steamship Company to ascertain who the owner is, or just why this pig was shipped on the Katahdin," suggested Uncle Tom. "Of course the address was on the crate, but was soaked off that day on Scilly Ledge," said Paul regretfully. "I think Uncle Tom's plan the best. Will you write at once, please?" said Billy. "This very day," vowed Uncle Tom. "Oh, do let us hear from you, will you, Mr. Charlton, and tell us what you find out about Katahdin," cried Zan eagerly as they walked towards the waiting automobiles. "Indeed I will. The Sunset Islanders saved Piggy's life from a watery grave, but the Grey Foxes saved him from the butcher's blade," exclaimed Uncle Tom. Then, amid shrill whistles, waving of caps and hats, and other forms of farewell, the two cars started away carrying a pleased party of visitors out of sight. A week passed without a reply to Uncle Tom's letter, and everyone began worrying lest they would have to go back home without having found Katahdin's rightful owner. Then came a bulky letter from the company. It contained letters written to a man in the Rockland hospital and his replies. They all pertained to the pig. After reading them, Uncle Tom smiled and started for Sunset Island with the information. "Well, Islanders, what to do about that pig?" asked he. "Goodness me, haven't you had any word yet?" worried Paul. "I've been thinking that I'd better hand him over to the captain if we have to go without finding another owner," said Uncle Tom, pretending not to hear Paul's question. This caused a disquieting silence, although the boys were very fond of Captain Ed. Still, each one had secretly hoped to take the pig home himself, if no other home had been found. Uncle Tom laughed heartily, for he read their thoughts correctly, and felt that he had taken an unfair advantage of them. So he took the bundle of letters from his pocket and motioned the children to be seated. The letters proved that the owner of the trick pig was the only passenger injured when the Katahdin was wrecked, and if he had not tried to save the life of his beloved pet, his only source of livelihood, he would have been spared some broken ribs. But upon hearing the frightened squeals coming from the pig that was kept in a crate, the poor man endeavoured to drag the box on deck and thus was struck by a falling spar. The crew carried him to the lifeboat, but he wanted to go back for his pig. They held him fast, however, and sent him to the hospital for attention. In his delirium, he called and called for his pig, ordering it to perform or calling it by endearing names when an act was well done. The nurses noted this and reported to the doctor, and the kindly doctor in turn reported to the authorities. Then, after hope had almost gone, came the letter from Uncle Tom. To say the poor man felt joy and relief at hearing that his pet was alive and so well cared for was putting it mildly. The letter he sent Uncle Tom was simply overflowing with gratitude. Before the Islanders left Maine to return to their city home, Uncle Tom came for them to hurry back with him to Rosemary and meet the owner of Katahdin. Here the pale but happy man shook hands with the children and thanked them repeatedly for what they had unconsciously done for him. "You see, when I first went on that boat, I wanted Pico, that's his right name, in my stateroom with me, but the steamship company wouldn't allow it. So they put him in a crate and put the poor thing down in the room with the freight. Ah me, how Pico must have suffered from fright that time when the ship hit those rocks, and after, when he was in the sea. The young pirates could have testified to the fear the poor pig felt, as shown by his wildness and squeals that day on the Zeus, but it would not have helped the still weakened man to hear that story, so nothing was told him about the rescue. The Islanders stood watching the happy owner strap the new crate on the back of the buckboard he had hired, and when he drove away, turning now and then to wave to the children, they sighed. "Say, do you know what?" exclaimed Billy suddenly. "No, what?" demanded the others. "Of all the adventures we have had at Sunset Island this summer, I'm not so sure but that saving Pico for this lonely man is in the deed to be recorded in our tally as being of the most value and importance." And everyone seconded Billy's heartfelt motion. The last days on Sunset Island came all too soon, and after such a wonderful summer of freedom and pleasures, the spectre of school lessons looming up with the limitations of city life created a zeal to crowd in all possible sport. As they all sailed for the last time over the bay to the campground landing where they expected to take the steamer, the three young boys thought with regret that they might have accomplished more than they really had. But Vita Tonkan felt the glow of satisfaction that he had realized one of his ambitions of life, that of being crowned the Sagamore of Sunset Island. End of Chapter 14. End of Woodcraft Boys at Sunset Island by May Folwell Hoisington and Lillian Elizabeth Roy.